This week we're going to discuss Chapter 9 and the idea of imperfect competition. In the past we have discussed perfect competition and how that relates to the agriculture field, and we're going to go ahead and modify that learning to include imperfect competition. When we consider all market structure characteristics, there are really four areas that we are evaluating: the number of firms and the size of those firms. What does a product look like? How differentiated is it? Are there any barriers to entry? And what knowledge and information is available in the market? While most of those may be pretty self-explanatory, sometimes the idea of barriers in entry can be a little confusing. When we talk about common barriers to entry, probably the two most common are the ideas of economies of scale coupled with capital access and cost. As an example, in an oligopoly, which we'll learn about in a few moments, a good agriculture example may be Grimway Farms. But if you wanted to become the next Grimway Farms, are there any barriers to entry? Is there anything keeping you from growing carrots? While there's not a lot keeping you from growing carrots, we would recognize to create the true size and scope of the Grimway facility, there would be a tremendous cost. Millions, maybe billions of dollars when you have to buy the land and develop the different packing plants and some of the distribution facilities they have. Could you do it? Sure you could. However, it's a barrier to entry to have to come up with all the finances that it would take to do so. The second common barrier to entry is some governmental policies. These may be through a copyright. So if you have created an idea and you've copyrighted that idea, there is a barrier for me to go ahead and do what you're doing utilizing that particular idea. So barriers to entry are important to consider, particularly in imperfect competition. Now let's go ahead and review some perfect competition. Remember, we said there were the four market structure characteristics: the number of firms. Well, there's a large number of firms in agriculture. If we talked about the product, how differentiated is it? In agriculture, at least in perfect competition, number 2 yellow corn is an example of an homogeneous product, meaning that everybody that produces it looks pretty similar. There are not any barriers to entries in perfect competition, and the knowledge and market resources that we can bring to bear, everybody has access to. So in putting this into a table, we would recognize number of sellers numerous, product differentiation none, entry, ease of entry or exit or barriers is unrestricted, and everybody has access to the knowledge. In considering perfect competition, it's a good example of how once supply and demand have been put together and an equilibrium has occurred, how that can affect perfect competition. We can see equilibrium has occurred and a price exists. At this price point of where consumers are willing to demand and producers are willing to provide, that price point in the firm's accounting becomes the amount that they're selling the product for. and that will reach a spot on their marginal cost curve and communicate the quantity they are providing. However, the firm doesn't have the ability to modify the price. If you wanted to raise your prices and sell your corn at a higher premium, why would the customers buy from you if they can buy corn from 400 other people of the exact same quality? Why would they pay a premium price for yours? And the answer is most producers would not. On the other side, in perfect competition, there's also a supply and demand in inputs. In this case, the labor market, but it could be water, it could be corn seed. There's going to be a supply and demand and an equilibrium price that has occurred, and that becomes the price of your inputs. And we've talked about how the marginal input cost and the marginal value product will dictate the volume of inputs you should purchase. Well, in perfect competition, if you wanted to go ahead and buy your corn seed more inexpensively, could you tell the seed broker, hey, I want to go ahead and buy mine for $25 a hundredweight. I know you sell it to everybody else for $30, but I want to buy mine for $25. The seed broker would probably let you know that there are so many buyers of their product that they're going to sell at $30 per hundredweight, and you are more than welcome to participate and buy from them or not buy at all. See, in perfect competition, firms are exclusive price takers. When you take a look at the price they're paying for their inputs, whatever the market says the price is what the firm will provide. They don't have the ability to negotiate on inputs. And on the other side, when they're selling their outputs, they're also not able to negotiate on the price for the outputs. Whatever the market price is what the price you'll sell your product for. So when we take a look at the overall demand curve in perfect competition, it's going to be a pretty level curve, meaning that once the price is established, if you wanted to sell 2 bushels, there's a price. If you wanted to sell 5 bushels, there's a price. If you wanted to sell 10 bushels, the price is the same. So no matter what the customer demands, the price we're selling for is the same. Fortunately, imperfect competition is a little bit different. And we have 3 varieties of imperfect competition: monopolistic competition, oligopolies, and monopolies. And their demand curves are generally a downward facing demand line like we're quite accustomed to. And that would remind us, as price is really high, the quantity demanded is usually a little bit lower. And as price decreases, the quantity demanded generally increases. So that's pretty typical in imperfect competition. Let's discuss the 3 different types of imperfect competition. The first is monopolistic competition. When we consider monopolistic competition, there are 4 different features. The numbers of firms, there's a bunch of them. When we consider the knowledge of the firms, it's all about the same. Nobody has commanding knowledge of the market. The barriers, there aren't any significant barriers in the market. But what makes monopolistic competition different than perfect is the product is differentiated. It is unique. Let me give you a couple of examples. I can remember as a kid walking down through the grocery store, holding my mother's hand, and we were going grocery shopping, and we went by the toothpaste area. And back in the day, toothpaste was pretty boring. You were either going to get a white paste or you're going to get some kind of gel. And they were all coming in a tube. And there were a lot of firms that were producing this toothpaste. Anybody seemed to be able to produce toothpaste that they wanted to. And it seemed to be kind of a boring, industry. But all of a sudden, walking down that aisle, I saw something special. I saw Aquafresh toothpaste. And Aquafresh, they took and they combined the white paste and two different colored gels. They were a unique product in the market. They had differentiated themselves compared to everybody else who was producing toothpaste. And because they were unique, it was as if they had developed a mini monopoly, meaning that we're the only ones that have this special toothpaste. So because it was differentiated, they could market it as special, and they could also price it differently. So if every tube of toothpaste was $3, well, Aquafresh was special. They may sell their Aquafresh for $3.25. So they created a mini monopoly. And because there wasn't any restrictions, it wasn't something they could copyright. Toothpaste is toothpaste after all. Every other firm began to go ahead and copy them. So they had a mini monopoly where they could go ahead and price their product at a premium for a short period of time until the firms did exactly what they did. And they were the same as everybody else. You may remember when McDonald's did the same thing. They were the first fast food firm to have an Angus burger. Wow, it was special. It had a different flavor tone, as at least what the marketing said. And if you wanted an Angus beef burger, boy, you went to McDonald's. And they were different in the market. They had a mini monopoly. Right up until Burger King, Carl's Jr., many other fast food restaurants copied them. And then the monopolistic competition went away. So what makes monopolistic competition unique compared to others is the products are temporarily no longer identical. They're trying to demonstrate how they are differentiated in the product. So we're special, we're different, we're unique, pay more for our product. Examples like soft drinks, Coke and Pepsi. There are a bunch of sellers, and the entire time they're advertising, telling everybody how they're unique, how they're special, and if they truly are special, they may get some additional profits in the short run when they're able to market and highlight their product as unique and special. But in the long run, others begin to sell the exact same product and they move back towards perfect competition. We see this in the fast food industry. There's lots of fast food industries, and we also see that in the coffee chain industry. I just mentioned Starbucks and Dunkin' Donuts, but there's several kinds of coffee chains out there, and they try to set themselves apart as special, differentiate their product in the market. But really, all coffee is pretty similar. So when we consider the idea of competition from perfect to imperfect, really perfect competition and monopolistic competition, they tend to just be different because of the product. So when we take a look at the market control, here's what happens when you go from perfect competition over to imperfect. If you have a perfect competition product, you have a small amount. You have next to no market control. Everybody has exactly what you got. No control at all. But monopolistic competition, they have a little bit more control than others might, because they are differentiated in their product. Now, the next more imperfect product is a product produced by an oligopoly. An oligopoly has a few numbers of sellers. An oligopoly might be something like cell phone providers. There's not very many of them, and they provide a product that's pretty similar. It could be like fuel providers. There's not very many fuel providers. In the agriculture world, we may say an oligopoly might be the carrot industry, where there are 3 producers of carrots in the United States. Now, what makes an oligopoly kind of unique, and the idea is they don't compete with each other aggressively, but they still do. What makes them unique is the fact that as they make their decisions, and in particular the price-making decisions, they are interdependent of each other. Let's talk about fuel. When fuel prices begin to go down, does one station bring the prices down, or does everybody's go down? On the other side, as prices begin to rise, doesn't the entire industry of fuel rise at the same time? You see, they don't really compete in their pricing. The fuels will compete in, Chevron has Techron. They try to differentiate their product. But what happens is, if one person begins to lower their prices in an oligopoly, if one firm begins to, then everybody else begins to lower their prices as well. And price wars tend to happen. On the other side, if one firm begins to raise their prices, the other guys don't follow suit. So really, we only see significant price changes when one person goes down, the entire industry begins to lower their prices, and before you know it, nobody in the industry is very profitable. So they are more interdependent in their decision making and their pricing structures. Examples of oligopolies could be farm machinery manufacturers, the airline industry, automobile industry, fuel industry. There's lots of examples of oligopolies that we can experience, and they all price themselves about the same. When we look at, again, the transition from perfect competition to imperfect, there's hardly any control in perfect competition. At least they can control their prices when they have a mini monopoly in monopolist competition, and oligopolies have even more control. The final imperfect competition is a monopoly. And many folks have heard of monopolies and have maybe even played the game. What sets a monopoly apart is there is only one seller in the market. Nobody else is able to play. One person has the product they're trying to sell. And because there's only one person that has a product they're trying to sell, they have absolute power over marketing that product. It is unique in the marketplace. You can get it in one location and one location only. And typically, monopolies still have to balance their pricing, because if they price a product obscenely high, then they can price it so expensive that nobody can afford it. So typically, they don't totally gouge the market, they just make it expensive enough that they can increase in profitability, but not so much that no customers can buy. Now, when you have the one seller, it has some examples. Telephone and power companies are an example. In my area, we have PG&E. They are the sole provider of electricity. Agriculturally, we can say that Monsanto's Roundup Ready product line, they have a monopoly on that. And if you try to go ahead and sell some Roundup Ready corn or Roundup Ready alfalfa, and you follow the exact same methodology that Monsanto followed, their trademarked, their copyrighted techniques, then Monsanto would sue you and put you out of business for copyright infringement. There is a barrier to entry. Currently, Wonderful has created, through some amazing genetic testing, a seedless lemon. It hasn't quite made the market yet, but if you try to sell a seedless lemon and you use the exact same technology that Wonderful used, then you would be stepping across copyright infringements, some trademarks perhaps, and their monopoly, the government's laws would work on Monsanto and Wonderful's behalf. When we take a look again from perfect to imperfect, market control, perfect competition, very little control. And as we move towards monopolies, we can see monopolies have the most control in the market. Now this is the selling market. These are the individuals that are selling products, and there's also imperfect competition in the buying market. We have a monopsony, which means there's a single buyer. We have a monopsonistic competition, which means the buyers, there are a lot of buyers, but they're differentiated in their buying strategies. And we have an oligopsony when there are just a few buyers. So let's consider the monopsony. A single buyer in the market. So if you're selling your product, let's just say you have cattle, and there's only one person that's buying cattle. Who sets the price? Is it you, or is it the one buyer? Of course, the one buyer has all of the power in the market. They will set the price that things are being sold for, and if you don't like it, you're more than welcome to not sell your product at all. And that has happened in the United States past. There have been times when there were single buyers in the market, and you either sold to them or you didn't sell at all until you went out of business. Oligopsony, there are multiple buyers and there's a little bit more competition. The profit of an oligopsony sometimes depends upon the elasticity of the supply that they're purchasing. And the third type of buyer is the monopsonistic competition buyers. And these guys have the ability to differentiate their services, and there are a lot of people that you can sell to in the monopsonistic area. We mentioned earlier that there have been some issues with monopolies in particular, and how in some cases there was a single buyer for all products. And the government has stepped in over time and attempted to regulate, and particularly try to regulate the power of the monopolies and the monopsonies to make sure that they didn't have total control over the market. And they've passed many legislative laws, but typically they try to create a price ceiling as an example, meaning that as products are sold, the government will set aside a ceiling, meaning you cannot sell the price higher than this. They will set the top price, and even if you are the monopoly and you're the only person that has a product, you can't go above that price. And we'll see that with like PG&E. In my area, PG&E is the power provider, and they don't get to sell energy at whatever price they want. The government regulates and tells them at what level can you sell electricity. And in some cases, the government has put in a minimum price or a floor, meaning that you have to go ahead and purchase this product at a minimum price. If you're in a monopsony and there's only one buyer, the buyer can't say, hey, I'm going to give you 12 cents for this, take it or leave it. The government sets a minimum price that the monopsonistic purchaser has to abide by. So there are ample legislative acts that you can read about in Chapter 9 that have affected agriculture over time. The first one was a Sherman Antitrust Act, and the latest one was back in 1937 talking about agriculture marketing agreements. So there hasn't been a lot of change in legislation in quite some time. As a closure, just recognize in the selling market, here's the way the world works. In perfect competition, which is a lot of what agriculture would demonstrate, in the perfect competition area, you have less market influence. And as you have less competitors, you end up with more market influence. Monopolies have the most influence, but there's only a single seller. Contrastly, it's very, very similar on the buying side. The less buyers there are, the more control of the market they tend to have. And the less there are, perfect competition, like most of agriculture's products, the least control you have of the market. There were not a lot of individual abbreviations in Chapter 9, but at the end of the PowerPoint that I posted, go ahead and take a look and see if you can find an additional educational treat that I left for you. As always, if you have any questions, reach out to your professor in the Ask the Professor forum, and good luck on exam number 3.